movies, cartoons, TV shows, they all have, when the creators, whether it be the writers or the producers or the people that distribute them, when they sit down and create these TV shows, movies, cartoons, they all kind of have one central goal in mind, and that is that they want to reach inside the audience and kind of pluck the strings of people, kind of reach inside your psychology of your psyche, and they want to play on something in your past. That's kind of the goal of every movie, is to get people to like it because they can relate to it in some way, and sometimes that relation is, well, something that happened to you in the past experiences, but sometimes, and I think a lot of times, especially when we're talking about non-realistic TV shows and movies and cartoons, it kind of speaks to those parts of us that we really don't let people know about a whole bunch. And one of the biggest genres of that type of thing is kind of the semblance of a world without control. And if you think about it, there's a lot of shows out there that kind of give us that picture, and we can go all the way back to cartoons, and one of my favorite cartoons was Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote, right? Everybody remember Roadrunner? Roadrunner was well, he was annoying. We can give him that, right? Roadrunner was annoying, beep, beep all the time. And he was always nice enough, I don't know if you call him a guy, but character, nice enough guy. But he was always being chased by Wile E. Coyote, right? And Wile E. Coyote, he was just, his goal was to get the Roadrunner, and I think he wanted to eat him. I think that's the goal. But it's how he went about it and what he did and what it looked like around him that's important, because Wile E. Coyote, I mean, Acme was his friend, right? And so he had Acme rockets, and he had Acme atom bombs, and he had, slingshots, and he had, bows and arrows and guns, and he brought all kinds of kitchen appliances and whatever it is that he could do to get this Roadrunner. But the overall theme, if you think about that, is that where was the control? Now, I don't know who controls relationships between Roadrunners and coyotes, but you never saw like any extraneous control, right? It was just him trying to get him, and it was pretty crazy. And then if we go to TV shows, we go to Lone Ranger, and I don't mean the Johnny Depp Lone Ranger, that kind of weird deal. I mean the original show, 1949, Masked Man and his Native American friend. They went around the West, and it seemed like there was no justice, because they'd like ride into this town, and the bad guy'd be doing whatever they want to do, no governmental control, and here, the Lone Ranger and Tonto were the last forces that were able to bring control. So we see that. Now, of course, the latest genre of movies that are ever so popular are those zombie movies, right? I mean, I don't know about you guys, but you can turn on the TV and nearly any time of day, and there's a zombie movie on. And when you look at a zombie movie, there's really two groups. There's the zombies, the flesh-eating, droolish, animalistic, driven by whatever drives a zombie for whatever it is they're driven for, that group. And then over here, there's the people, or I guess what's left of humanity. And they're not a whole lot better than the zombies, because they're like running around killing as many zombies as they can, and they're using, again, household implements, hammers, whatever it is. But again, where's the governmental control? There's nothing there. And what I want you to see in all of those instances is that without control, without judicial process, without the backbone of government, there's kind of like chaos going on. Thank goodness for the Lone Ranger, but there's chaos. Now, that's a genre of TV show where all control is removed, but there's also instances in our life and in movies where government control is just kind of like ignored for a period of time. And one of the best examples I could find, Dylan, if you'll go to the next, is the movie The Purge. Anybody heard of the movie The Purge? It was a movie last year, and the premise of the Purge was this, is that for 364 and a half days a year, society was pretty much normal, like we are, if we can call ourselves normal. If we can make that jump. But society was pretty much normal. They had governmental control. They had police forces. They had, social services. They had all that stuff for 364 and a half days a year. But then the last 12 hours, between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m., all of that, they do away with. There's no control. And they call that the purge. And the people that don't want to be a part of the chaos lock themselves inside the house. But the people that are out, what they see is that there's death, and there's killing, and there's robbery. And so just the suspension of governmental control, of judiciary process, of authority for those 12 hours causes the world to, or at least the United States, to get really bad really quick. Now, in real life, we have instances like that too. And we can Most of us can remember things like 1992, Rodney King, the police officers are acquitted in Los Angeles, and for the next few days or weeks, it was nothing but riots. I mean, the people just went crazy. They tried to bring in the National Guard, but they really couldn't control them. So we kind of ignored the government there. If you've been following Egypt for the last few years, they've been trying to instill a new type of government, so there's kind of turmoil between this government and that government, riots, because nobody's in control. And if I can relate it to Wiggins just a little bit, I know that one of the struggles that Wiggins has had of late is that with our town council, with trying to move forward in history, trying to revitalize the town and make changes, I know that there's struggle there. And so while there is still government in place, there's still a struggle. But if you remove that government, I want you to see that there is chaos. And so on the heels of last week's sermon where we talked about the fact that God said that we should follow governmental rule, that we should make ourselves subject to authority, and we gave the biggest reason because God's word says so, and then we talked about that a little bit. On the heels of that subject, today I want to talk about the purpose of that government that God says is necessary. So it's going to be kind of the application section of it. What does that mean for me, the purpose of the government? And so Paul starts to give us those purposes, and he starts in verse 3, which I'll read again. Paul says, "For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same." There is in your bulletin a follow-along sheet. You can take some notes if you want to. I know some people enjoy that, some don't. Makes it feel like school, but if you want to follow along. So the first purpose I want you to see is to maintain a quality of life. To maintain our quality of life. And then kind of the overriding theme is the law is fear to the wicked. The law is only bad to those people who are trying to destroy that quality of life. And we think about Los Angeles and how the quality of life was destroyed for those people who weren't involved in the riots. And we think about Egypt, about the innocent bystanders, and about how their quality of life was disturbed by this government overchange. And we think about ourselves in Wiggins, how sometimes our services are interrupted. But the government's primary concern, the government's primary job, if you will, when it's operating properly, is to maintain our quality of life. And there's kind of an irony associated with that, and that is that when things are going good, and I mean, can we consider ourselves to have a pretty high quality of life in America? Would you agree with that compared to the rest of the world? So I'm going to go out on a ledge and say that our quality of life is pretty good, but yet we still complain about the government and about how terrible it is. But you know what? That complaining gets even louder when the government's not in control, because then things really break down and get bad. So government is designed to control our quality of life, and it does so in so many ways, and it may be ways that you hadn't thought about. So I thought I'd come up with this kind of short scenario about what it would look like if we woke up tomorrow and there was no regulation, no authority, no government control. What would tomorrow look like? So pretend that there's been none for a while, because I know some of this stuff would take a few weeks or months to arrange. But we wake up tomorrow, there's no government control, there's no authority. I mean, bosses can't tell us what to do. Nobody can tell us what to do because we're in charge, and we like it that way. I've heard some people tell me that in the last week. I wish there was no governmental control. So here's a picture of that. You wake up tomorrow, and I hope it's after sunlight, because if it's before sunlight, you're not going to have any electricity in your house, because that's government regulated. So you're not going to have any lights in your house when you wake up tomorrow, so there's no electricity. You might have a generator, I guess, if you figured that out, but no lights. And so you stumble out of bed and you fall over things, if it's like my house, and you make your way to the kitchen and you want that cup of coffee. But you open the cupboard and there's no coffee. Because coffee, to get it to the grocery store or to get it from wherever it's grown, takes interstate transport, and that's regulated by government agencies and authorities. So you don't have any coffee, which I know for some of us would make us really mad. So we kick the refrigerator, which isn't working anyway because it broke down and we can't get parts because of that interstate transport. So we kick the refrigerator because we got no coffee, and we break our toe. Okay, so now we're in trouble because we got a broken toe, and we're going to go to the doctor. But remember, doctors Hospitals, the medical field is regulated by authority. So you go to the clinic down the street, or what they call a clinic, and there's a guy named Mo in there. Now, Mo used to sell used cars about 2 weeks ago, but since there's no regulation, Mo always wanted to make the jump from used cars to the medical field, so Mo's going to tend to your toe today, but he really doesn't have any medicine because, well, that's regulated by authorities and governmental controls, and so Mo can't really do a whole bunch for you. He sends you home. You're really upset at this point because you know you can't go back to work. You know you're not going to receive unemployment because that's controlled by authority and government. So you've got a broken toe, you've got no coffee, you've got no electricity, your refrigerator's broke. And you get home and you find your neighbor digging through the trash. Now, you didn't like your neighbor anyway, but you get in an argument with your neighbor, and the next thing you know, your neighbor pulls a gun on you and starts shooting at you, and you would call the police, but there's no authority and governmental control. So now, that's probably not probable. It's probably not going to happen like that. But is it possible if we did like those people say, and we'll take away all that control, if we just were able to rule ourselves? You see, the government, its primary purpose is to provide the quality of life that we want it to. And in so many ways it does, but we forget that because we want to complain about it. So that's reason number one, to provide the quality of life. Paul keeps moving on now, and he goes to verse 4, and he says, "For he is the minister of God to thee for good, but if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain. For he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil." The second purpose of authority, of government, is to bring retribution for evil. For those people that choose to not do the right thing, the people that offend us, that persecute us, the second purpose of the government is to bring retribution for evil. And I want you to see how that fits with the first, because in order to maintain that quality of life, the government has to have repercussions for stepping outside or taking away that quality of life. So if the purpose is to maintain the quality, the way that that's done is that the government and the authority brings retribution to the evil. Now that's important because last week we talked about as we were starting this sermon that Paul seemed to like make a jump. He was talking about in the previous 12 chapters of Romans here, he was talking about everything Christ, and then suddenly he makes this jump to government. And we said that's kind of unusual, but if we back up and we go to the 12th chapter and the 17th verse in Romans, Paul says, "Recompense to no man evil for evil. Provide things honest in the sight of all men. If it be possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath, for it is written, Vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. Therefore, if thy enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink. For in doing so, thou shalt heap coals of fire upon his head. Be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good." That is great and well and a wonderful set of verses until someone does you wrong. Until someone breaks into your house and steals your 50-inch TV set. Until your neighbor's digging in your trash and pulls a gun on you. Until Mo tells you to, eat yeast to fix your toe and it makes you sick. The government's second purpose is to bring retribution, prosecution against the people that wrong us, the good people. And without that, our quality of life could not be maintained. So the government is used by God to provide the quality of life we have come to expect. And no matter how good or bad a government may be, it is still better than no government at all. Think about that. Because even in the worst of economies and governments, they're providing something for the people. So Paul gave us those two reasons, to maintain a quality of life and to bring retribution to the evil. But now Paul kind of turns. He says, those are the reasons. Now I want to talk about how you, as Christians, can accept those reasons. How are you going to deal with the fact that last week we talked about God said to be subject to authority, and then today we said that the reason that he wants us to be subject to authority is to maintain quality of life and bring a retribution to the evil. So what is our response going to be? And he talks about our response in verse 5. Paul says in verse 5, "Wherefore ye must needs be subject not only for wrath, but for conscience sake. Paul says there's two responses to what we've been talking about since last week and so far today. There's two responses. There is for the sake of anger or wrath, or for the sake of conscience. So now it's kind of your turn to decide. Here's the pastor up here telling me that I should be subject to authority and government, which I've spent my whole life hating. So now I have to decide, number one, if I'm going to do it, and then how is my attitude going to be about doing that? And Paul says that you could do it for wrath purposes. Now here's what wrath purposes means. Wrath purposes means that you do it only because you're afraid of what might happen to you if you don't do it. The only reason that you listen to governmental control, the only reason that you listen to your boss, the only reason that you listen to your, I was going to say wife, but I won't. The only reason that you listen to authority in your life is for fear of what might happen if you don't. That's one way to take it. Now, the other side of that is you can do it because God said so, and it's the right thing to do, and that becomes your conscience. I believe that conscience, the thing that everybody I believe has, unless you are truly mentally irregular, I think that everybody has a conscience, that spirit inside of them that speaks to them about right and wrong. So you can do it because you're afraid, or you can do it's because the right thing. Think about driving to work and you're late. Speed limit's 65, and you pull it up to 65 mile an hour and you're thinking about going faster. I know nobody in here has ever done that, me included. But we're right at 65, and we're contemplating driving 75 because we're late for work, but the speed limit's 65. Here's where that wrath or conscience thing comes in. You could speed up, and you might, but you're constantly worried about what's going to happen to you. So maybe you slow back down because you're worried about getting caught, The cops around the corner, under the next underpass, whatever it is. Or you can choose to drive the speed limit even though you're late, even though when you get to work your boss is going to yell at you or whatever's going to happen, simply because it's the right thing to do. And Paul is telling us that when it comes to this oversight, this subjectiveness to authority, this listen to the government, we have the same choice. That we can do it because God told us to. It's the right thing to do. Remember, God ordained the leaders. He reached down and said, well, I don't think God said this, but he said, as bad as you are, you're in charge. And so if God said so, we should do it because it's a right thing to do. Or we can do it with an attitude, and we can do it out of wrath for fear of what could happen to us if we don't listen. So now you have to decide what motivates you, wrath or conscience. Now Paul wants to push us just a little bit further. Paul says, okay, so now I've given you the choice to make. We've talked about that God ordained government. You're to listen to it because I told you to. I told you that the purposes of government is to maintain quality of life. I told you it's to take care of the evil things that happen to us. And he says you can choose to do that because it's the right thing to do or because you're just plain angry and you're afraid of what will happen to you. But now he wants to see if we'll actually listen to him. And so in verse 6 and 7, Paul says some interesting things here. He says, and this is going to be interesting to you because this is where the rubber hits the roads for us. He says, for this cause pay ye tribute also. He says, pay your taxes. For they, the authority, are God's ministers, attending continually upon this very thing. Render therefore to all their dues, all their fees, DMV, road tolls, we could go on and on. Render to all their dues, tribute to whom tribute is due. I guess that means to donate to their campaign funds if they want you to. I don't know. Custom to who custom, that's talking about tariffs, bringing in goods. Fear to whom fear, respect them. And here's the hardest one to swallow. Honor. Everybody say honor. Honor to whom honor is due. So Paul says, pay your taxes. Pay them anything else that we're supposed to, that the government has set up that we're supposed to. Don't talk badly about them. And try to honor them if at all possible. That's really a hard pill to swallow. I understand that. Now, all along last week and this week, I do want to make kind of a disclaimer that there are areas for dissension within leadership, within authority. We're given, especially in our country, many ways to disseminate from something we don't think is right. We have ways to voice our opinion, and I highly encourage you. I'm not telling you to be sheep. I'm not telling you to walk blindly off cliffs and follow politicians. I am asking you to work within the guidelines established in our country and our authoritative system to change that system. To not throw it away and say it's no good at all, but to work within it for a change. That's what we in a democratic country are supposed to do, right? By the people, for the people. Change things for the better. Now, I want to show you this letter because some of us, when it comes to that last part, we pay lip service, we'll listen to the government, whatever. But when it comes to doing something about it, then it becomes difficult. So I want to share this letter that this gentleman wrote to the IRS because I think this is some of our attitudes that we have. It says, "Dear sirs, I have been unable to sleep at night due to the guilt of not having paid my past due tax debt. Therefore, enclosed, you will find a portion of my 2013 tax payments. As you notice, a check for 50 cents is enclosed. If for some reason the sleeplessness continues, I will consider sending more. Sincerely, Sleepless in America." That in so many ways is our attitude when we talk about government. What we'll do as little as possible to go along with it, and we're not going to be happy about it. And I have to say that I think there are a lot of people out there who spend a lot of energy, a lot of aggression in opposition to leadership. So I'm going to encourage you to try to come to that place where you do it because it's the right thing. Work towards the change in our country and in our cities and in our town and in our homes for betterment. But remember, God has ordained these people to be in charge. That's what God's word says. And Paul gives us the reasons behind that. I'm going to finish up with a final quote, which I thought was very interesting. And it was given by James Madison, who's the 4th president of the United States. And James Madison said, "If men were angels," let's conclude women in there. If men and women were angels, do I have any out there? Okay. If men and women were angels, no government authority would be necessary. I'm only going to speak for myself. I'm not. And so I know I need at least some authority in my life. Hopefully my wife's not here. Don't tell her that. But we all need authority. It betters our life. It makes sure that people don't do evil things against us. And most importantly of all, if we go back to next week, God ordained these people to be in charge. So I hope that you can come to peace about all that we've talked about for the last couple weeks. I hope that you can be an effective change in our country and in our church. And I hope that you do subject yourselves to authority. Peace and blessings. Amen.